Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm Kavitapwe. The war on Syria has taken a new turn. Israel strikes a Syrian military research center inside Syria. Now, this attack came after many unsuccessful attempts by the Western-backed armed terrorist groups to capture this site over the past month. Is al-Ghari, who's supposed to be an enemy of Israel, now working with Israel in fighting the Syrian security forces? Just one of the questions in this edition of the debate. We're also going to ask our guests why the UN and the Arab League have been silent, and more importantly, will this Israeli move now risk a spillover into a wider conflict?
Tensions flare up in the Middle East after Israel's warplanes bombard Syrian territory. Syrian TV has aired an army statement condemning the attack. The military said the attack targeted a scientific research centre near Syria's capital, Damascus. The statement said the Israeli raid came after many unsuccessful attempts by, quote, terrorist groups to capture the research centre during the last few months. The airstrike left some workers at the research centre dead and several others injured. Syria has threatened a, quote, surprise response to the Israeli regime. Iran has also slammed the Israeli aggression.
The operation conducted by the aggressive Zionist forces against some targets in Syria last night shows that this regime is after creating instability and insecurity in regional countries, as well as weakening the resistance movement. It also shows that as soon as the Zionist regime finds an opportunity, it continues with its crimes and aggressions.
The Israeli airstrike has also been condemned by Lebanon's government, the Lebanese resistance movement Hezbollah, and Russia. Moscow has called it unacceptable.
We analyze all the information we receive, and if it will be confirmed, then our main conclusion is that it is a very serious breach of the UN Charter.
As usual, Israel is silent about its attack on a regional nation. Media reports have said Tel Aviv received the go-ahead from its key ally, the US, before launching the aerial operation over Syria. Political analysts have said that the Israeli airstrike against Syria was aimed at diverting the Syrian army's attention from its fight against foreign-backed insurgents and at boosting those militants' morale. The strike comes against the backdrop of escalating conflict between insurgents and Syrian forces, with troops making gains in different parts of the war-ravaged country. Syria has frequently accused Western governments, particularly the US and its regional ally Israel, of having hatched a plot to bring about regime change in Syria, with the ultimate aim of changing the geopolitical map of the Middle East in favour of Tel Aviv and the West. The latest airstrike by Israel on Syria can attest to this claim.
The rockets and shells will not scare us, and will continue to defend Syria and will continue to live, because they're the ones who own the culture of death, while we own the culture of life, existence and history.
Let's get this debate going. Let me introduce our guests. We have from Washington, Nabil Mikhail, who's a professor at the George Washington University. From London, Bashar Mohammed, who's a journalist, writer, and activist. And from Beirut, we have Franklin Lamb. He's a director of Americans Concerned for Middle East Peace, who joins us. Gentlemen, welcome. I'd like to start with you, Bashar Mohammed, and ask you what you make of this Israeli airstrike which happened inside Syrian territory, which according to reports, destroyed a military research facility.
Thank you. Well, to start with, I am against linking the Israeli airstrike with the rebels on the ground, because when Israel launched an airstrike in 2007, there wasn't even a revolution, as the rebels call it, or an instability, as the regime calls it, or a civil war, as I call it. Israel is just acting as the school bully. Israel is not concerned with all what's happening in the Middle East, as long as its security is safe. And they were not expecting, or until now, they are not expecting any reaction from Syria. I believe Israel is determined to do whatever it can do to prevent any weapons or chemical weapons, as they call it, to arrive to Lebanon, to Hezbollah, because Hezbollah would use it against Israel, while Syria would not use it. So they are just taking advantage of the situation in Syria and stopping these missiles or these convoys from arriving to Lebanon. and knowing that Syria would not respond and the rebels would not respond as well. So it is just taking advantage of the situation, and at the same time they are sending a message to everyone, the Arab community especially, that after the elections in Israel and the Netanyahu slight majority winning, that the foreign policy would not change. Even if a different party joins the government, it's still the same war government Israel always had.
Mm-hmm. Well, Franklin Lamp, this attack came after many unsuccessful attempts by the armed terrorist groups to capture the site over the past months. So there's one camp that's concluding, is al-Qaeda terrorists an enemy of Israel, now working with Israel in fighting the Syrian army?
I do not think.
Franklin Lamb, go ahead.
Thank you. Before I address that point, the 3 points that our colleague in London made, I take a different view of each one of them. It is not at all clear that if Israel, the Hezbollah had these weapons, they would use them. The one who uses weapons comes from the other side normally, that is Israel. What they would give if they had them would be another aspect of the resistance defense, the defense of Lebanon. So I take a different view on that. As far as not being involved with the rebels, I take a different view of that as well. We've seen a big difference between October and February with what's going on in Syria. And that is the fact that the people are increasingly supporting the government. I've been there most of the last 2 or 3 months talking to a lot of NGOs, shopkeepers, citizens, officials, and the rest, and there's been a real shift. A shift of popular support for the reasons you know, the disgruntlement with the so-called opposition, and it seems that the army is now increasingly securing the area. So I think that's a different situation. As far as a message, I don't think it's much of a message being sent. We don't need a message in this part of the world. Everybody knows the election, not election, the Zionist enterprise is going to continue its aggression and its hostility to the resistance, and the resistance is symbolized by its major pillar that is Syria. Syria is Iran, Hezbollah, Islamic Jihad, and Hamas. So I don't see particularly a message there. But I do think it's an act. We know from the reports, or we believe from the reports, there's some facts we still don't have, is that this was green-lighted from America. The reports are that they had advanced knowledge, and they didn't stop it. So they're complicit as armors, as funders, and those who had an opportunity at least to try to stop it. Now, today, we're having at the U.S. Congress important hearings for the new Secretary of State, Chuck Hagel, or hopefully he will be. One wonders, is this going to be discussed there? Or will the lobby be able to sweep it to the side and focus on some remark that Hagel may have made about the quote, Jewish lobby? So there's big issues here, but I think it's serious. I think it's potentially extremely dangerous. Remember, the Islamic Republic has an agreement with Syria. An attack on one is the attack on the other. Hezbollah does too. I think they're being challenged and tested by Israel to take some pressure and attention away from the UN condemnation of the settlements. So I see those motives differently from our colleague in London.
Right, and there's lots of different dynamics that you introduced there, Franklin Lamb. But Nabil, Mikhail, you know, there's another camp that's saying, first of all, what advantage would this bring for Israel? What would Israel reap from this? Except for the fact that this airstrike was meant to lift the morale of these armed terrorists, since they're suffering great losses and defeats. Do you agree with that?
Washington actually is very confused about the whole episode. So to answer the question, what advantages will Israel gain, this has to be confessed by the Israelis themselves, because Washington itself cannot tell what advantages or gains will accrue to Israel. That confusion is symbolized by the title of the Washington Post today, describing the whole episode between Israel and Syria as conflicting reports. There are no clear reports or stories told about what happened. So far, the Defense Department, the State Department have been silent on the whole issue, And the White House also has not issued any report. So Washington is extremely, extremely cautious about what Israel did. And I do not think there is any strategic assessment to answer your question, what kind of gains will Israel have? But of course, there are many serious implications, and it could be detrimental. I would assume that some people in the Pentagon, military experts, are asking Israel, are you going to rely on airstrikes, or are you going to use the system known as Iron Dome to defend yourself? Some people in the Pentagon or in other security agencies would like Israel to exercise as much self-restraint as possible. But by attacking targets inside Syria, Israel could be derailed into the Syrian quagmire, and everyone will be a loser, including Israel. So I think, in the light of that silence, I think other nations should step in. Europe and Russia really have to speak up and to make the issue contained. Do not touch Syria. Do not interfere and meddle in Syria. The country has enough troubles of its own. Do not widen the regional context of the conflict. If these weapons, research facilities, whatever, are supplied by Russia, Russia has to make a statement. Please make sure that these things are not used to aggravate the conflict. But Washington so far has not figured out what kind of response to say to the Syrians, to the Israelis, and perhaps it will never say anything. So it is very confusing, and it could actually lead to more problems.
Well, Frank and Lamb, I know you have a reaction to that. I've been seeing your
Sure.
facial gestures there, but can you hold on to that since we have our guest in London there?
I will.
And we talk about silence here. Our guest talked about it, Bashar Mohammed. What about the silence of Arab countries, in particular, maybe the Arab League? Why haven't we seen a reaction? This is Israel attacking another Arab country inside in its territory, on its soil.
I am actually not surprised. I'm actually surprised that anyone is surprised. The Arab League and the Arab countries have always been silent about such things, and even if they have any action, it won't exceed condemnation of anything. I believe the most of the Arabs were taken by surprise as well, and they do not know how to respond because they had no idea what's going on. They are waiting for the Israeli or the American side to comment and for them to follow. Apart from Egypt, not a single Arabic country condemned this, including the Syrian opposition. So the silence is because of the mystery and the confusion that they are in now because of this situation. And even the only statement that we saw from Syria came with the same responses that we always hear. We reserve the right of retaliation and the surprise and the option to respond, but that's still repeating what have always happened. And I believe in this situation, in this time, this is a time where Syria should take serious action regarding this and serious response. We have seen them responding to the Turkish planes when they shot down a Turkish airplane previously. We've never seen any retaliation against Israel, and when some shells fell in Golan Heights, they responded that this is by mistake and apologized. So
okay, well, let me ask you if there's going to be a retaliation from Syria. Where? On which country? To whom? Israel? Turkey? What are we talking about?
It should be Israel because allegedly Israel have been in the Lebanese airspace since Tuesday evening, and they moved the Iron Dome from the Gaza Strip to the northern front. So for any country like Syria, talking about security and military intelligence, they would expect such a thing. And Syria can easily retaliate in the Golan Heights, on the the warplanes that invade the airspace of Syria and Lebanon all the time. There must be a response.
Well, let me bring in Franklin Lamb here. Franklin Lamb, is that what Israel, I mean, is Israel provoking and therefore wanting a reaction? And then Syria, will that be a possibility there of Israel being the one that they're going to target in terms of a reaction? Would that even be something Syria would think about?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think that the provocation part is correct, but I imagine that the Americans and the Israelis would like Syria to retaliate. They would like Hezbollah to retaliate, but it's not going to happen. First of all, Syria is occupied elsewhere, and this would just give the Western powers, all those who are funding and shipping weapons and the rest, an opportunity for what they want, what John McCain wants, which is a hot war. He wants no-fly zones, he wants it. So I think there may be a provocation in that, but I don't think the Syrians will retaliate on that. But I must say that I don't think Washington was surprised, and I don't think they're confused today. Remember, they admit that they consulted in advance with the Israelis. You don't think by their involvement every day on a number of issues, including the U.S. intelligence agencies, that they were caught by surprise? No, they admit they had knowledge in advance, and I maintain that the reason, probably the reason for this attack is to draw attention away from the fact that the region is changing dramatically in the last 3 months on this issue. You know that. The Gulf countries, the Americans, the Turks, they're pulling back. Why? They're changing their ideas. Why? You know the reasons. The opposition is out of control. The jihadists are increasingly a threat. They're looking at what happened in Libya. And the fact of the matter is that they don't like the odds.
Right. That's a very good point, Franklin Lamb. Let's capitalize on that point and bring in Nabil Mikhail, which Franklin Lamb, Nabil Mikhail disagrees with you about the U.S. not being aware of this. But Franklin Lamb made a good point. They are retracting, aren't they? Do you agree with that, first of all? Nabil Mikhail.
The American side is retracting?
Yes. Aren't they?
I would say, I mean, I read the newspaper. I would say the Pentagon is very cautious, and as the newspaper said, Israel called America half an hour before the strike took place. So Washington knew, but knew not a long time ahead of the matter. But still, that also could establish Washington's responsibility, because just they should have said no. And for sure, Obama knew about it, because if you call the Pentagon has to call someone. They have to call the Oval Office. So I think also somehow Obama knew about it. We do not know much details about it. But I think Washington is not recognizing the strategic significance of Israel getting involved into the Syrian crisis. That will mean that Israel will be part of the conflict over Syria, and this again could make things more complicated for the Syrians and more complicated for the Israelis. If the Assad regime collapses, this means a huge refugee problem, 2 to 3 million people flocking on the borders with Israel, with Jordan, with everywhere. So it is really dangerous. So I think Obama did not deal seriously with the Israeli attack against Syria. He perhaps, I mean, is not thinking too much about it. He's
now wait a minute. When you say he's not thinking too much about it there, Mr. Nabil Mikhail, let me tell you this. You raised the Washington Post, okay? And you're saying the U.S. maybe didn't think too much about it. But you know, the Washington Post has also posted in their blog reporters from Beirut, from Jerusalem, from Washington saying this has worked against Israel and it's worked against the U.S. Because if there is any possibility of their allies, of Syria's allies, straining, such as Iran, Russia, now they are committed more to this resistance against all the wars and the initiatives being brought onto Syria. So it has backfired on Israel. Do you agree with that assessment, Bashar Mohammed, coming through, as our guests are pointed to the Washington Post and the reporters?
To a certain extent, but I believe it's a lot more than how the Washington Post describes the situation. It is a chaos in Syria, no question about that. The opposition have disappointed its allies one time after the other. and there is no clear image as to the post-regime situation. That's why I believe many of the countries supporting the oppositions are taking some steps back. Saying that, at the same time, the West and Israel are not fond of Bashar al-Assad regime, so they are in a situation of trade-offs. They are trying to strike as much of their interests as possible, whether by holding off or delaying any military progress or development in Syria, or by stopping any convoys of weapons going to Hezbollah, or by weakening the position of Syria. It's a collection of things that at the end of the day is serving only Israel and the interests of it. The situation in Syria is taking a long time to resolve because it could affect directly Israel, and that's why everyone is taking their time in trying to find the best solution that would suit Israel in the region, not the Syrian people nor the regime.
Well, Franklin Lamb, you know, this comes at a time when, for the first time, the top political opposition leader, Mr. Maaz al-Khatib, has expressed a willingness for talks with representatives of President Bashar al-Assad. And we're also looking at news about how U.S. Vice President Joseph Biden is going to meet Russian Foreign Minister and the opposition chief. So this kind of puts a dent into the political gestures that are being made there. Again, it seems like anytime there could be progress, something comes into the picture and puts a dent into it. What's your reading into the gesture there made by the opposition leader, Mr. Maaz al-Khatib?
Well, I think that his effort or his suggestion, I think he was pushed to make that suggestion because the opposition is collapsing quickly. Again, I don't know if we have the time, but I spent a lot of time in Syria, and it's very clear. I don't say this because I'm in love with the Assad regime. They've made a lot of mistakes, but I think they're trying to get their act together. But the fact of the matter is the people are coalescing more, and kind of quickly, kind of dramatically. So I think, but I just want to make pick up on one point that was made earlier about where are the Arabs? You know, the Arabs, ever since '48, we know where the Arabs are on this. But who I really fault, because this is an act of war, and this sets up Israel theoretically even for expulsion from the United Nations, and they ought to be sanctioned.
Franklin Lamb, I'm so sorry to jump in. Hold your thought.
No.
And I'll let you continue in a moment. I do apologize. We'd like to get some of the viewer comments on this strike that Israel has placed inside Syrian territory. Let's take a listen to and a read on what they have said.
Fajr el-Said. It's a shame that Salafists give hand to Israel to fight the Muslim nation of Syria. Zafar al-Nasheed. It's obvious. The military building that Israel has bombed is the one that terrorists of Al-Qaeda attempted to destroy several times. Altaf Hussein. Not only Al-Qaeda and Israel share the front line against Syria, they share all the front lines like the war in Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and some of the countries in the Middle East. Aman Verma. Both of them share the same ideology against Islam. Al-Qaeda is the brainchild of CIA.
Okay, there you have the comments there made, and I'd like to go to you. 30 seconds, Nabil Mikhail. Both of them share the same ideology against Islam. Al-Qaeda is brainchild of CIA. Do you agree with the viewer comments there?
No, not the same ideology, perhaps the same goals, but the ideology could be different. And this is what makes the situation is confusing. It is a diverse coalition of different forces. Each is working toward his goal, and this is why we have a strategic mess.
Very well. Franklin Lamb, Al-Qaeda in Syria sharing the front line against the Syrian government and its forces?
I think I agree with the colleague from Washington. They share certainly the same goal with respect to the regime change, at least that far. But no, as to the future, I think there's a difference.
And Bashar Mohammed, what do you think? Al-Qaeda and Israel sharing the front line against Syria?
No, I think I agree with my two colleagues. They are working in two different ideologies, but the result is the same, which is the destruction of an Arab country, and it's not serving Islam in any way or shape. So it might be same results, different ideologies.
Very well. Let me thank our guests. We're out of time. From Washington, Nabil Mikhail gave us his comments. He's a professor at the George Washington University. You just heard Bashar Mohammed. He's a journalist, writer, and activist from London. And Franklin Lamb, Director of Americans Concerned for Middle East Peace, gave us his statements from Beirut. Thank you for watching another edition of The Debate. Do send us any questions or comments, please, at newsroom@presstv.ir. From me, and the entire team in the capital, Tehran, it's goodbye.